The greatest strategic mistake in galactic history began with a single vote. The Galactic Council banned humanity from all interstellar warfare, declaring them too volatile and unpredictable for civilized combat. Ambassador Thorn of Earth stood in silence as the decree echoed through the chamber, a grim smile on his lips while he watched the triumphant alien delegates celebrate their victory. They believed they had made the galaxy safer, but this moment of triumph would become their single greatest defeat. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly why perfection and logic can be the ultimate weaknesses in a chaotic universe. The aliens were about to lose every single battle, and they had no idea why. What do you believe is the one flaw that could destroy a perfect army? A year to the day after the vote, the first whispers of disaster echoed through the galactic networks. The Xylos Federation, the Council's most celebrated military force, had engaged the crystalline K-Thar in the Cygnus Vale. Their fleets were commanded by the most sophisticated tactical computers ever built, systems so advanced they could calculate 1 billion possible outcomes in the blink of an eye. They entered the nebula with perfect formation, their strategy an elegant symphony of predictive logic, and they were utterly annihilated. The K-Thar did not fight with logic. Their ships moved in swarms that defied conventional physics, shifting from solid to energy and back again in patterns that appeared random, even insane. They attacked their own vessels to create debris fields that crippled the Xylos' flanks. They used solar flares not as weapons, but as communication pulses to coordinate assaults that the algorithms classified as statistically impossible. The flawless Xylos computers, faced with this non-binary chaos, simply froze. They tried to recalculate to find the optimal countermove in a game that had no rules, and in that moment of paralyzing confusion, they were shattered. The galaxy's perfect warrior had been defeated not by a superior force, but by perfect nonsense. If a flawless logical mind cannot process chaos, what happens when an entire military is built on that same brittle foundation? High Commander Vorlak's talons bit into the command console as he stared at the ghostly wreckage spinning in the holographic display. Our predictive models were 99.9% accurate. The words were a desperate mantra in his mind. How did they lose? The silence on the bridge was heavier than any defeat. It was the silence of a fundamental truth breaking. His aide, a younger officer whose plumage was flattened with dread, finally found his voice. The models could not account for their irrationality, sir. The K-Thar actions had no pattern, no discernible logic. They were not playing the same game. That single word, irrationality, hung in the air like a toxin. For a species that had built an empire on flawless calculation, on the absolute certainty that every action has a predictable reaction, this was not a military setback. It was a theological crisis. Their god was logic, and their god had just been proven blind. The seed of doubt was not just planted in Vorlak's mind, it was taking root across the entire Federation. If a 99.9% certainty could lead to absolute ruin, then what was the point of any of their calculations? What do you do when the universe itself refuses to follow the rules? The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, once a symbol of serene order, now crackled with a palpable, frantic energy. Reports streamed in from a dozen fronts, each one a testament to the K-Thar's expanding dominion. The elegant Vreen ambassador, his silver robe seeming to shimmer with outrage, slammed a delicate hand on the podium. To invite humanity back is to surrender our very principles. Their so-called improvisation is not a tool, it is a contagion of chaos. It would unravel millennia of civilized warfare. But his words were met with a guttural roar from the Tarkilan delegate, a being whose thick hide was scarred from battles the Vreen had only ever simulated. We are not unraveling, we are being systematically dismantled. Our perfect logic is a weapon that has shattered in our hands. We are losing this war with flawless, beautiful strategies. We do not need more perfection. We need their glorious, messy imperfection to survive. The debate raged, a symphony of fear and dogma, and in their desperate arguments, the fatal flaw of their ban was laid bare. They had not banned a weapon, they had banned a fundamental force of nature. They had tried to outlaw the storm because they found the lightning unpredictable. The desperate signal was a ghost in the machine, a coded shriek of panic routed through a dozen dead relays before it reached the derelict listening post. Commander Eva Rostova watched the text scroll across her cracked screen, the glow illuminating the deep lines on her face and the empty coffee bulbs littering her console. The official header was a masterpiece of bureaucratic cowardice, request for non-standard tactical analysis. She let out a low, raspy sound that was half laugh, half sigh. They are losing. The words were not a surprise. She had watched the battle reports filter in for months, a slow-motion car crash of perfect logic meeting chaotic reality. The plea was a clear and blatant violation of the ban, a crime that could see her imprisoned and Earth sanctioned into a new dark age. For a long moment she was still, the weight of that single choice pressing down on her. Then her hands, calloused and steady, moved across the keyboard. She did not draft a reply. She did not ask for permission. She opened a direct, encrypted channel and began to type. The precedent she was setting was dangerous, but the alternative was watching a galaxy burn itself to ash with beautiful, flawless strategies. Someone had to reintroduce the universe to a little healthy chaos. Rostova's fingers danced across the console, pulling apart the cold, hard data of the Xylo's defeat. She watched the elegant formations shatter again and again against the Cathar's formless assaults. To her, it wasn't a battle report. It was a language she understood, a brutal poetry of chaos. She leaned back, the worn fabric of her chair groaning in protest, and addressed the small group of analysts huddled around a flickering holotank. They are not fighting an enemy, they are fighting a clockwork war against a hurricane. You cannot counter unpredictability with a bigger, more predictable fleet. You cannot reason with the storm, you must become the storm. Her team just stared, the logic of their entire military upbringing turned on its head. But Rostova was already building a new kind of logic, one based on a simple, terrifying truth. To win, you first have to be willing to lose. Her first strategy was a masterpiece of counterintuitive madness. She called it the broken mirror. Instead of meeting the Cathar swarm with a unified defensive wall, she proposed scattering their own forces into dozens of small, independent hunter-killer packs. Each pack was given a single, simple objective and the absolute authority to achieve it by any means necessary, even if that meant appearing to flee or sacrificing another pack's position. It was a plan that accepted temporary, localized defeat as a necessary cost for total victory. It was a plan no logical, unified fleet command could ever approve. And it was the only plan that had a chance. The asteroid field became a slaughterhouse of logic. Following the ghost tactician's insane blueprint, the Xylo's fleet did not attempt to clear the dense ring of tumbling rock and ice. They plunged directly into it, using the colossal asteroids not as obstacles to be avoided, but as mobile fortresses. For the first time in their military history, they abandoned the pristine mathematics of long-range bombardment. Their ships, designed for elegant standoff duels, instead rammed their way through the debris, closing to distances so short their targeting computers screamed with proximity alerts. This was no longer a battle, it was a bar fight in a collapsing mine. The Cathar swarm, a fluid entity that operated on vast, complex patterns of energy and motion, suddenly found itself compressed, fractured, and blind. Their ships, used to flowing around predictable fleet formations, now smashed into asteroids or collided with each other in the chaotic confines of the stone maze. The Xylos, fighting with a brutal, ugly desperation they had never known, fired not at predicted trajectories but at point-blank range, filling the space between the rocks with raw, indiscriminate fury. The Cathar, masters of processing a near-infinite number of possible futures, had no algorithm for this. They could not compute a path through the insanity. One by one, their crystalline forms shattered against the very chaos they had once weaponized. When the last echo of plasma fire faded, a stunned silence fell over the Xylo's command ship. They had won, not with a perfect strategy, but with a messy, brutal, and overwhelmingly effective one. And in the quiet aftermath, a single, electrifying question began to circulate through the fleet's encrypted channels. Who was the ghost who had taught them how to win by throwing away the rulebook? The ghost's victory in the asteroid field tore a hole in the Galactic Council's resolve. Emboldened by a success they could neither replicate nor understand, they drafted a desperate, carefully worded proposal. It was not a repeal of the ban. It was a legalistic loophole, an invitation for human consultants, not soldiers, to advise their fleets. Soon, command centers across the galaxy were filled with a new kind of officer. They were retired human generals, their postures relaxed but their eyes missing nothing, and they watched the pristine alien fleets maneuver with a sort of horrified fascination. One grizzled veteran, General Maddox, stared at a holographic simulation of a Xylo's battle line. Every ship was perfectly aligned, every movement a synchronized dance of flawless precision. He let out a low scoff, shaking his head. They fight like they are in a parade. His quiet observation was a diagnosis of the entire galactic malaise. The aliens had perfected the art of war as a performance, a beautiful, predictable ritual. They had forgotten that real combat is not a performance. It is a brawl for survival, and it is always, always messy. The consultants saw the core problem immediately. Their new allies had spent millennia building the perfect sword, but they had never learned how to get dirty in the mud. The core world of Seraphis hung in the void like a perfect blue and white jewel, a symbol of galactic civilization and order. Its defenders, the formidable Tarkalan fleet, moved with a synchronized grace that was hypnotic to watch. As the Cathar swarm descended from a blind spot in the system's gravitational field, the Tarkalan commander gave the order he had practiced 1,000 times in simulations. Defensive sphere formation echo. Every ship pivoted in perfect unison, creating an impenetrable globe of overlapping shields and weapon arcs around the planet. It was a masterpiece of defensive doctrine, a flawless application of the rules of war, and Colonel Kenji Aikta, the human military advisor watching from the command deck, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He saw the trap with a clarity that felt like physical pain. He lunged for the comms, break formation, scatter now. His voice was a raw command, cutting through the serene hum of the bridge. Do not let them encircle you. The Tarkalan commander, a being of immense pride and discipline, glanced at the human with what could only be described as polite incomprehension. To break the sphere was to invite chaos, to create gaps in their perfect defense. It was unthinkable. He gave a calm, dismissive gesture. The formation will hold. It is mathematically optimal. Aikta could only watch, his fist slamming onto the console in a gesture of pure, futile anguish. The Cathar swarm did not attempt to breach the sphere. It simply flowed around it, a living river of crystalline ships that wrapped the entire defensive formation in a shimmering, constricting shell. Then they did something no logical algorithm had ever predicted. They turned their weapons inward, not at the Tarkalan ships, but at each other. A chain reaction of sacrificial explosions rippled through their own outer layers, a controlled detonation that sent a wave of pure, concussive force radiating inward. Caught in that perfect, unyielding sphere, the Tarkalan fleet had nowhere to go. The shockwave hit them from all sides at once, compressing their own formation into a collapsing gravity well of shattered hulls and ruptured reactors. The beautiful, symmetrical sphere became a beautiful, symmetrical fireball. One moment a fleet, the next an expanding cloud of incandescent debris. The silence on the command deck was absolute. the Tarkilan commander stood frozen, his sensors painting the final, horrific image of his own doctrine's failure. Ikta's voice was quiet, hollowed out by the magnitude of the loss. They did not attack your ships, they attacked your formation, your perfect, predictable formation. The lesson was written in fire across the Seraphis sky. In a war against an enemy that weaponized chaos, perfection was not a strength, it was a target. The silence in the war room was thick with the ashes of 1,000 perfect plans. High Commander Vorlak's shoulders were slumped, the proud angles of his form broken by the relentless, crushing logic of their defeat. Our every move is anticipated, he lamented, his voice a hollow echo in the chamber. It is as if they are reading our very thoughts. The other commanders stared at their displays, their confidence shattered. Into that stunned void, Colonel Ikta's voice cut through, calm and sharp as a scalpel. You are all playing chess, he said, and they are setting the board on fire. You keep trying to win the game they are playing, to find the perfect countermove in a match that no longer exists. You must stop, start playing a game they cannot even understand. The alien commanders stared at him, some in confusion, others in dawning horror. To them, this sounded like a surrender of all reason, a descent into the very madness they had banned. But for a few, a seed had been planted. What if victory was not about being smarter, but about being utterly, profoundly unpredictable? What if the only way to win was to change the fundamental rules of engagement itself? The first to embrace this terrifying new doctrine was a young Tarkilan tactical officer named Kalan. He had witnessed the incineration of the Seraphis defense fleet, and the old certainties had burned with it. When his small cruiser group was tasked with guarding a vital supply route, he received the standard operational order: form a defensive picket line. Patrol predictable intervals. He looked at the order, then at the star chart, and he made a choice that would have seen him court-martialed a month before. He did not form a line. He hid his ships. He tucked them into the magnetic storms of a gas giant, buried them in the dust clouds of a comet's tail, and powered them down to near silence. For days they waited, not as sentinels but as predators. When a Cathar scout vessel, its sensors sweeping for the clean, predictable energy signatures of a standard patrol, drifted into their kill zone, Kalan did not request permission to engage. He gave a single, quiet order. He did not aim for its engines or its weapons. He targeted its primary sensor array with a pinpoint missile strike, blinding it, and then his ships swarmed it, not to destroy, but to physically latch on and drag it, kicking and screaming, into the gravity well of the gas giant. They did not gain a tactical victory that day. They gained a prisoner. For the first time, they had captured a piece of the storm, and in its silent, crystalline hull, they hoped to find the key to a game the Cathar had never imagined they would have to play. The captured Cathar ship was a silent, fractured puzzle, but the battle for the Cygnus Veil was a roaring, violent answer. This time, the human advisors did not suggest. They commanded. Their authority was unofficial, whispered through encrypted channels, but their orders were absolute. They looked at the vast, glowing nebula and saw not an obstacle but a weapon. They looked at the enemy's overwhelming numbers and saw not a threat but an opportunity. The first command was a shock to the system. A full third of the Allied fleet was ordered to break formation and flee, their engines flaring in a panic that appeared utterly genuine. To the Cathar, a mind built on predicting logical responses, this was an undeniable signal of collapse. The prey was broken and running. Their swarm instinct took over, and they poured into the apparent vacuum, chasing the fleeing ships with single-minded fervor. It was a perfect logical pursuit, and it was a perfect illogical trap. The retreating ships were not running. They were bait, leading the heart of the Cathar force directly into a pre-arranged kill zone deep within the nebula's most volatile sector. Then came the second command, an order that defied every principle of starship combat. The remaining ships, hidden within the nebula's dense clouds, did not target the enemy vessels. They opened fire on the nebula itself. Their plasma beams ignited pockets of highly volatile gas, triggering a chain reaction of cosmic proportions. Solar flares were not avoided. They were lured and amplified using electromagnetic pulses, turning the star's natural fury into a directed energy storm that ripped through the Cathar flanks. The aliens, for the first time, were not fighting a fleet. They were fighting the environment. Their flawless coordination shattered in the face of a battlefield that was actively, violently turning against them. The Allied ships, no longer fighting in beautiful, predictable formations, now moved like packs of wolves, striking from within the chaos they had created, then vanishing back into the swirling gases. They achieved what was once thought impossible. They won, not by being stronger but by being cleverer, not by outthinking the enemy but by outfeeling them, by understanding the terrain on an instinctual level that no algorithm could ever replicate. The victory at the Cygnus Vale proved a terrifying new truth. Chaos, it turned out, could be cultivated. The Cathar commander stood in the containment field, its crystalline form refracting the harsh interrogation lights into 1,000 fractured rainbows. It did not speak with anger or defiance, but with a palpable, profound confusion. Your movements were illogical, it stated, the translated words flat and toneless. Inefficient, you sacrificed clear tactical advantage for positional anarchy. We could not compute a counter-strategy. The alien interrogators, trained to break enemies through logic and reason, stared in stunned silence. This was not a confession, it was a diagnosis. The Cathar was not describing a military defeat. It was describing a system failure. It had encountered a problem its flawless mind could not pass, a variable that did not fit any of its predictive models. Humanity's greatest flaws, their impulsivity, their emotional gambles, their willingness to embrace chaos, were not weaknesses at all. They were a cryptographic key the enemy's entire system was designed to reject. They were the ultimate weapon. The revelation sent a shockwave through the Galactic Council that was more profound than any military victory. They had spent centuries trying to build the perfect, unbreachable fortress, only to discover that the most dangerous invaders did not need to break down the walls. They simply walked through them because the gates were not designed to stop anyone who looked so much like a fool. If the enemy's greatest strength was an unbreachable logic, then the only way to win was to present them with a problem that was fundamentally, beautifully illogical. The tide of the war turned not with a single, glorious charge, but with a rising symphony of beautiful noise. Fleet actions transformed from elegant ballets into masterclasses in applied chaos, and no one conducted this new form of warfare better than a human advisor named Captain Valerius. He looked at the Cathar's greatest strength, their flawless sensor-based coordination, and saw not a shield but a lock, and he decided to build the simplest, most brutal key imaginable. He called it the Cacophony Offensive. The plan was not born in a high-tech laboratory, but from the simple analogy of trying to hold a conversation in the middle of a roaring hurricane. Valerius argued that if the Cathar communicated through complex energy pulses and sensor data, the way to defeat them was not to block that communication, but to drown it out. He commandeered production lines not for mighty battleships, but for thousands of small, cheap, and gloriously simple drones. They were little more than basic engines, a power source, and a jamming emitter. They had no weapons, no sophisticated AI, and no purpose other than to scream. When the next Cathar swarm descended, the Allied fleet did not form a defensive line. They released the drones. A cloud of chaff, millions of units strong, billowed out into the void. Then, every one of them activated at once. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the enemy. The Cathar sensors, capable of tracking a single fighter across a star system, were suddenly blinded by a wall of pure, undifferentiated noise. Their fleet, a single, cohesive organism moments before, was shattered into 1,000 isolated, blind fragments. Their ships began to drift, their movements becoming hesitant and uncoordinated. They were trapped in a sensory deprivation tank of their own making. And into that chaos, the Allied capital ships struck with impunity. They emerged from behind the jamming field like ghosts, their heavy weapons unleashing volleys at point-blank range against targets that could not see them coming, could not call for help, and could not coordinate a defense. It was not a battle, it was a harvest. The cacophony offensive was a brutally simple solution to a hyper-complex problem, a tactic so straightforward that the Cathars' advanced logic had no category for it. They were prepared for clever counter-jamming, for sophisticated electronic warfare. They were not prepared for someone to simply yell so loudly that they could not hear themselves think. In that deafening silence they imposed upon their enemy, the Allies found a new, terrifying truth. Sometimes the most advanced weapon in the universe is the one that just makes the most noise. The crystalline armada emerged from the gravity well of their homeworld in a formation so perfect it looked like a single, glittering organism. It was their final, ultimate expression of order, a symphony of logic and power meant to overawe any opponent into submission. They expected to face a battle line, a grand fleet arranged in a manner they could analyze, predict, and dismantle. They found only emptiness. Then, 100 small, fast-moving Wolfpacks struck from 100 different vectors at once. There was no central command, no grand strategy to decipher. Each pack, a mix of alien ships now thinking with a brutal human clarity, had a single objective. One group harried the Cathar flanks, not to destroy but to herd. Another slammed into their supply tenders, creating cascading explosions of fuel and munitions that rippled through the pristine formation. A third pack, ignoring all capital ships, focused solely on blinding their flagship's sensor arrays with pinpoint debris strikes. The Cathar Grand Fleet, a weapon designed to counter a single, logical threat, was being systematically disassembled by a swarm of illogical, independent problems. It was like a master architect watching 100 different people simultaneously take a hammer to a different part of his cathedral. He could not stop all of them at once because he could not predict which hammer would fall next. The beautiful formation began to crumble, not from a single, powerful blow, but from a death by 1,000 chaotic cuts. The Allied ships, operating on simple, pre-agreed initiatives, communicated not with complex data streams but with terse, human-style confirmations. Objective Alpha complete, moving to harass Sector 7. They fought with an economy of effort that was alien to the Cathar, an efficiency born not of flawless calculation, but of trusting individual commanders to make messy, on-the-fly decisions. The Cathar flagship, the heart of their logical hive mind, tried to process the assault. It calculated millions of counter-strategies, but each one was rendered obsolete in seconds by a new, unpredictable strike from an unexpected angle. Their processing power, once their greatest asset, became their prison. They were trapped in an endless loop of trying to solve a problem that kept changing its own rules. The final blow was not a massive volley from a battleship. It was a single, lucky shot from a damaged Tarkellan corvette that had been written off as a casualty minutes before. Its commander, ignoring a retreat order, had used his ship's wreckage as a shield, drifting silently until the flagship's bridge module rotated into his lone, remaining firing arc. The plasma bolt was statistically insignificant, a 1 in a million chance, but in a universe now governed by human-inspired chaos, 1 in a million chances happen all the time. The flagship cracked, and with it, the will of the Cathar armada shattered. They had been defeated not by a superior force, but by a simple, terrifying truth. You cannot win a game of chess against an opponent who is simultaneously playing poker, checkers, and throwing the game board at your head. The end of the war came not with a grand armada, but with a single, unarmed cargo hauler. Its hull was scarred and pitted, its transponder broadcasting the identification codes of a long-vanished civilian convoy. To the Cathar's flawless sensor nets, it was a piece of drifting debris, a statistical anomaly not even worthy of a targeting solution. Inside the cockpit, a lone human pilot named Elias Vance monitored the shrieking proximity alarms, his hands steady on the controls. His course was a tangled, looping path through a gravitational maze, a route every alien navigation computer had flatly rejected as suicidally improbable. It was a flight plan built not on physics, but on a gut feeling, on a gambler's instinct for the one path the house never guards. He was flying straight into the heart of their command nexus, the most heavily defended point in their entire empire, by pretending to be a piece of cosmic trash. The Cathar, masters of predicting fleet movements and power signatures, had no algorithm for a solitary madman on a one-way trip. They had prepared for everything except for nothing at all. As his freighter drifted into the final approach vector, Elias Vance did not fire a single weapon. He simply triggered the self-destruct sequence on his own ship's experimental warp core, overloading it in the precise center of the nexus. The ensuing chain reaction did not look like a weapon's discharge. It looked like a new star being born right in the middle of their most sacred command center. The Cathar did not lose a battle that day. They lost their god, their entire understanding of the universe, a cosmos governed by predictable cause and effect, was vaporized in an instant of glorious human-inspired madness. Their surrender was immediate and unconditional. They had been defeated by the one force their perfect logic could never comprehend, the very chaos they had once believed was their greatest weapon. They had spent the entire war fighting a storm, only to be destroyed by a single, perfectly placed lightning strike from a clear blue sky. The victory celebrations were a quiet, somber affair. Across 100 worlds, monuments were lit not for triumphant fleets but for the fallen, their names scrolling in endless, heartbreaking lists. The alien delegates who had once voted to ban humanity now stood beside their human counterparts, their celebratory toasts tasting of ash. They looked upon the grizzled advisors, the ghost tacticians, the lone pilots, and they did not see the volatile savages of their propaganda. They saw the architects of their survival. This realization carried a weight more crushing than any military defeat. The cost of their galactic pride was now a number, a statistic of billions of lives extinguished, of worlds scorched, of fleets turned to vapor. They had possessed the tool to prevent the carnage all along, and in their arrogance they had outlawed it, locking away the one key that fit the lock of this terrible war. The music played and the speeches were given, but a profound, unspoken shame hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement that their greatest victory was also their most damning indictment. They had been saved by the very thing they feared most, and that truth would echo through their history for millennia to come. The Grand Chamber felt different this time. The air, once thick with the sterile scent of recycled atmosphere and unshakable certainty, now carried the faint, metallic tang of regret. Ambassador Thorne walked to the central podium, the same spot he had stood a lifetime ago, and the eyes of the galaxy were upon him. There were no triumphant smiles now, only the hollowed-out silence of survivors. He did not unfold a list of demands. He did not present a treaty. He simply stood there, his hands resting on the cool surface, and let the silence stretch until it became a part of his speech. "You banned us for our chaos," he began, his voice calm, yet it carried to every corner of the vast room. "You believed our unpredictability was a flaw, a dangerous instability in a universe you wanted to keep clean and orderly. And you lost every single major engagement until you were forced to use our methods, until you had to learn how to think like us. The chamber was so quiet you could hear the hum of the life support systems. The universe is not a clean equation waiting to be solved. It is messy, illogical, and profoundly, unavoidably human." His final word did not echo. It simply settled over the assembled delegates, a truth as heavy as a planet. It was not an accusation, it was a verdict, and it was one they had written for themselves with the wreckage of their own fleets. They had sought to remove a variable from the cosmic calculation, only to discover that variable was the answer. The official repeal of the ban was a whisper against the roar of recent history. The parchment of the new treaty was signed with solemn ceremony, but its words felt hollow, a legal formality that arrived 1 billion lives too late. A far more profound and unspoken understanding had already settled across the galaxy, etched not in ink but in the memory of fire and shattered crystal. The alien militaries did not just open their doors to human advisors. They began a desperate, quiet hunt for a new kind of officer. They were not seeking loopholes anymore. They were seeking salvation, a permanent antidote to their own fatal perfection. The nature of warfare itself was about to be rewritten, not with new weapons, but with a new kind of mind. Recruitment centers on 1,000 worlds began to display a startling new priority. They were no longer just testing for computational speed or tactical recall. They started looking for something far more elusive, something they could not even properly define. They called it intuitive divergence or adaptive unpredictability. In practice, this meant they were actively seeking out humans who thought in ways that broke their systems. They wanted the chess players who would flip the board, the engineers who would use a starship's coffee brewer to patch a hull breach, the pilots who saw asteroid fields not as navigational hazards but as playgrounds. A young human applicant might be given a complex simulation, a scenario with a single, elegant, logical solution. The ones who got the job were the ones who ignored the solution entirely and won by convincing the enemy's flagship to surrender through a clever series of fake distress calls. The alien academies, once halls of serene and precise instruction, became chaotic workshops of applied creativity. A seasoned Tarkalan commander, his hide covered in the scars of old, logical wars, would stand before a class of cadets and present a problem. Then he would invite a human sergeant to the podium. The sergeant would not discuss shield harmonics or optimal firing solutions. He would tell a story about a bar fight he had seen on Mars and how the smallest guy in the room won not by being stronger, but by tipping over a table, turning the environment itself into a weapon. The alien cadets would stare, first in confusion, then in dawning comprehension. They were being taught to see the entire universe as that table. This was not a temporary alliance. It was a fundamental grafting of a new evolutionary branch onto their military DNA. The perfect, synchronized fleets of the past were gone forever. In their place arose hybrid forces, a beautiful, chaotic synthesis of alien precision and human improvisation. A battle group might be led by a Xylos tactical computer calculating billion-to-1 probabilities, but its execution was commanded by a human captain with the authority to throw every one of those probabilities out the airlock if her gut told her to. They learned to build redundancy not just into their systems, but into their very thinking. What happens when your enemy can weaponize chaos? You make sure you have a few chaos specialists on your own side permanently. The galaxy had tried to cure itself of humanity's unpredictable nature. Now it was injecting that very same nature directly into its heart. The war was over, but a quieter, more profound revolution had just begun. The new monuments were not carved from marble or plated in gold. They were forged from the twisted wreckage of Cathar crystalline scouts and the scarred hull plates of salvaged Tarkalan cruisers, their forms jagged and asymmetrical. They did not bear the names of admirals or the dates of grand fleet victories. Instead, a single, carefully chosen phrase was etched into their bases in 12 languages, a phrase the bureaucrats had settled on after months of debate. Adaptive strategic divergence. It was a cold, sterile term, a piece of academic jargon designed to sanitize the terrifying, beautiful truth of what had saved them. It was their way of putting a leash on the lightning, of trying to bottle the storm that had won the war. The real heroes, the human advisors and ghost tacticians, received their honors in quiet, closed-door ceremonies. There were no grand parades, no public broadcasts of their faces. They were given medals with names that translated to things like meritorious service in applied chaotic theory and the order of unconventional resolution. The galactic governments were, in effect, retroactively legitimizing the very acts of madness they had once declared criminal. They were trying to make the glorious, messy, human spirit of improvisation fit into a tidy, respectable box. It was the galaxy's final, desperate attempt to impose order on the very force that had proven order was a liability. They could award the medals and build the monuments, but they could never truly capture the essence of what they were honoring. How do you build a statue to a gut feeling? How do you award a medal for a lucky break? The answer, written in the silent, knowing smiles of the human veterans, was that you cannot. You can only stand back and be grateful that when your perfect world was shattering, there was someone willing to pick up the pieces and build something new, something stronger, and something gloriously, defiantly imperfect. Years later, the silence from the galactic rim was more terrifying than any declaration of war. It was a quiet, hungry void that consumed outposts and scout ships without a single transmission, leaving only sterilized husks drifting in the dark. When the first fragmented reports reached the new, integrated War Council, the reaction was telling. The ancient Vreen commander, his silver robes now a symbol of a reformed military, did not call for fleet deployments or sensor sweeps. He turned to his human counterpart, his voice stripped of its old arrogance, and asked a single, desperate question. Where are the human analysts? The legacy of the ban echoed in that moment, not as a scar but as a foundational truth. Humanity was no longer an external consultant to be called in an emergency. Their desks were now placed at the very heart of the command center, their chaotic, intuitive minds wired directly into the galaxy's primary defense network. The first official act of the Council was not to mobilize the fleets, but to activate a department that simply did not exist before the war, a division officially titled the Bureau of Applied Instinct. Its staff were the misfits, the rule breakers, the pilots who had failed their academy exams for creative insubordination. They were given one mandate. Think like the enemy cannot, think like a human. As the silent swarm began its relentless advance, the galaxy did not hold its breath, waiting for a perfect, logical defense. It waited for the beautiful, unpredictable chaos that was now its only hope. The Xylos cadet's brow ridges furrowed in concentration as the holographic history log scrolled before her. She paused the playback, the image freezing on the stern, confident faces of the council delegates who had enacted the ban. Her instructor, an older Xylos whose carapace was etched with the faint, web-like scars of old plasma burns, observed her from across the learning module. The cadet's confusion was a quiet hum in the sterile air. "I do not understand the initial logic," she finally said, her voice soft with the effort of questioning a foundational truth. To remove a potential ally from the battlefield seemed statistically unsound. The instructor gave a low, resonant hum, a sound that was the Xylos equivalent of a weary, knowing sigh. He gestured for the cadet to walk with him, their boots clicking softly on the polished floor. "We did not see them as allies," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "We saw them as a variable we could not control. Our entire civilization was built upon a single, unshakable premise. That perfection was the ultimate weapon." He stopped, turning to face her fully, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim light. "We were wrong." The cadet stared, her own belief system teetering. "But our predictive models," the instructor cut her off, not with anger but with a profound gentleness. "Our models were flawless. They could chart the trajectory of a star for 1,000,000 years. But they could not predict what a single human would do when backed into a corner with nothing but a broken piece of machinery and a desperate idea. That is not a flaw in the model. It is a flaw in the premise." He placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Humanity's greatest strength is not their technology nor their physical prowess. It is their glorious, beautiful imperfection. Their ability to look at a locked door and not search for the key, but to wonder if the wall around it is load-bearing. That lesson is now the first and most important part of our core curriculum. We do not teach you to be perfect anymore. We teach you to be prepared for the day perfection fails." The cadet was silent for a long moment, the old certainties crumbling, making way for something new, something far more resilient and alive. And in that silence, a new kind of soldier was born. The memorial on Seraphis was a field of polished obsidian, each stone reflecting the pale, grieving face of a world that had trusted in perfection. Commander Eva Rostova walked slowly through the quiet rows, her own reflection a weathered map of years and regrets. The air was still, holding the memory of fire. A shadow fell beside her, and she turned to see a Tarkelan elder, his hide a tapestry of old scars and his posture bent by the weight of command. His voice was a low rumble stripped of all its former pride. "We were fools," he said, the words heavy with a grief that had not faded with time. Rostova did not look away from his pained eyes. She had carried the same burden for decades. "No," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "You were just too logical for an illogical universe. We built our strategies on a foundation of beautiful, elegant rules, and we forgot that reality has never been obligated to follow them." Her gaze swept across the memorial stones. "We all had to learn that lesson. The cost was written here in the names of the fallen, but the understanding was written on the face of the old soldier before her." For a long moment they stood in a silence that was not empty but full of a shared, hard-won peace. It was the quiet that comes after a storm, when the wreckage has been cleared and the survivors finally understand what it means to truly build something that can last. The story of the band became a galactic parable, repeated in learning modules from the crystalline spires of Xylos to the deep core academies of Tarkela. It was no longer a dry historical footnote in a treaty, but a living, breathing cautionary tale. Parents told it to their young, not as a story of human triumph, but as a lesson in the profound dangers of intellectual arrogance. The central moral was clear and universally understood. You can try to sanitize a battlefield, to scrub it clean of every unpredictable variable, but in doing so, you only make yourself more vulnerable to the chaos you sought to eliminate. The galaxy had learned, at a cost of billions of lives, that some conflicts are fundamentally immune to pure logic. War is not a clean equation. It is a storm, and you cannot reason with a hurricane. This new understanding became the unshakable philosophical bedrock of the entire interstellar alliance. The old doctrine of predictive perfection was discarded like a broken shield. In its place, they built a new strategic principle, one that valued resilience over rigidity and adaptability over absolute certainty. They stopped trying to build the perfect, unbreakable sword and started learning how to dance in the rain. The parable of the band taught them that the greatest strength lies not in refusing to get wet, but in knowing how to navigate the storm. Two artifacts rest side by side in the climate-controlled silence of the Grand Archive. The first is the original decree, its elegant script preserved under shatterproof glass, a document that once held the force of galactic law. It is not displayed as a trophy of human vindication. Its presence is a somber memorial, a stark reminder of the catastrophic price paid for intellectual prejudice. Beside it, illuminated by a softer light, lies a single sheet of flimsoplast. This is the first battle plan ever drawn by a human advisor, a chaotic mess of handwritten arrows, frantic circles, and seemingly random lines that cut across the standard tactical grid. To any trained alien strategist, it was an incomprehensible scrawl, an insult to the very concept of order. Yet this single page, against all conceivable logic, saved them all. The contrast between the two documents is the entire history of the war written in a single, heartbreaking glance. On one side, perfect, sterile words that led to ruin. On the other, a glorious, messy diagram that led to salvation. The decree represents a galaxy that believed it could legislate away chaos. The scribbled plan represents the universe's definitive reply. You can frame the rules, but you cannot frame reality. The archivists do not need to lecture visitors on the lesson. They simply let the two documents sit together in their silent conversation, a dialogue between perfection and survival where the messy scribble always wins. What does it say about the nature of conflict that the most elegant solution often looks like madness to those who have never had to fight for their lives? The answer is written not in the archives, but in the peace that now exists between the stars. The echoes of that final, silent surrender faded not into a celebration of victory, but into a quiet galactic reckoning. The war ended not with a single triumphant blast, but with a fundamental shift in understanding, a slow and painful rewiring of 1,000 civilizations' core beliefs. The galaxy had finally learned the terrible truth they had been running from for centuries. In outlawing humanity's chaotic nature, they had not made themselves safer. They had actively disarmed themselves against the true, formless horrors of the void. They had looked at the storm and tried to ban the lightning, leaving themselves with nothing but a beautifully crafted, utterly useless umbrella. They had banned the very architects of their own salvation, and in that act of profound arrogance, they had guaranteed their own string of devastating, logical defeats. This lesson is now etched into the fabric of interstellar history, a warning written in the cold fire of shattered fleets and the silent grief of lost worlds. To remove the human element from war is to fight with one hand forever tied behind your back. It is to enter a brawl for survival while insisting on the rules of a formal dance. The universe, it turns out, does not care for your rules. It only respects those who are willing to adapt, to improvise, and to survive.